So what we're looking at here today and this week is this deal with operations. And this is an interesting chapter because the fact of the matter is, you know, when we get down to it, running a business involves actually doing the running of the business. So this particular unit is more about how are we physically going to run the business day to day. So it's not a strategic chapter in the sense of is looking at it at the 30,000 foot level. It's like, how do we get from point A to point B on this day to move our organization forward, to make the products that we make, to do whatever we need to do. So operations is the fundamental running of a business. And when we think about running, it is what is effectively the heart of the business in order to make that happen. It's covered in Unit 5, and it's also covered in Unit 10 of the textbook. So that's what we're looking at right there. What we're going to do in this particular chapter, again, is we're looking at business from the point of view of the business firm. And most common way that we look at it is a production type of operation. So I guess, you know, if your business is a service type business, this doesn't necessarily apply so much. But if it's a production type business, we need to be aware of how we can manage our production and what are some of the tools that we can use, some of the business tools that we can use in order to make it as successful as possible. We're going to explain the production process. We're going to describe the management of the components of the physical facilities of a small business. We're going to talk about the types of layouts used in small business manufacturing firms. We're going to list the factors to consider planning the layout of a small business, a retail type store, and we're going to explain the methods of purchasing and controlling inventory. So we're looking very much at the inventory. This, I have in each of these, some of you may have noticed, within the course itself, I have a little printable document that I put that includes basically a summary of what we're looking at in the particular unit. In this case, it's the one with the marijuana plant on it, of all things. And, you know, when I did up this, it was just at the beginning of the legalization of marijuana. And we're thinking about, okay, so we are suddenly growing plants. It could be marijuana plants, it could be flowers, it could be anything. But that's very much an operation. We got to think about now, how do we get this business to run? So what have we physically got to do? We got to plant a seed in the ground. We got to water it. We got to give it lots of light. It has to grow. It grows to a certain point. And then someone's got to harvest it. And then when it's harvested, we might have to do something else with it, you know, freeze it, dry it, chew it up, slice it, dice it, whatever. There's a number of processes that we need to do in order to go from the seed, and even possibly before the seed, maybe we'll, in the case of a business, for example, when you're thinking about a greenhouse type operation, you got to think about, how do we mix the soil? What do we put the soil in? How do we get it set up so we can get the most efficiency out of it? So you can think about it in terms of a series of steps. And operations is like walking up a set of steps. Every single stair has something that you have to do, and all together, taken all together, they'll bring you to the next level, which is effectively how the business does whatever it's supposed to do. So this unit really introduces you to the operational issues related to business, particularly decisions regarding locations, facilities layout, sources of supply, and inventory control. And if we think about a production system, as I just say, you got to think about it normally in this black box type system that is always talked about in business. We have a bunch of inputs. So here we got inputs. And those inputs are brought into the system, and they run through some magical, mystery, unknown, hard to define process that is different for every single business, okay? So the process is really the focus of what operations is all about. We take the inputs, we do something with them to make them the output. And the output is the final project. So if we're thinking about apparel manufacturers, so we're making clothes, what we have to do is bring in raw materials. So what are the raw materials? Cloth, thread, buttons, So you can imagine that coming in the front of the factory door. We have to take a certain amount of that cloth, a certain amount of the thread, and a certain amount of the buttons, and we have to do something with it. Usually it involves, in the case of this type of thing, we need to store it. So we got to have some place to keep it until it's being used. So we need to worry about inventory and these sorts of things. Then when we take the cloth, in order to make a shirt out of it, we need to cut it. It has to be cut into pieces that match the various components of a shirt, the front, the back, left side, right side, sleeves, collar, these sorts of things. Then we have to sew it. So those parts all had to be connected together, the sleeves to the front and the back, and the collar put on the top. Then once it is sewn, it has to be, I'm going to call it made presentable. So we need to press it so we get the wrinkles out of it. And we put it in some sort of a package that makes it look nice. And I'm sure you've all seen shirts packaged in some way or another. And then once that's done, we need to ship it. So this is this black box, this process that we're talking about clothing. And the output is clothes, in this case, dresses or shirts or these sorts of things. But that's a manufacturer. You can think, okay, manufacturers, I can understand that. All the parts come together. We do something with the parts to make something that we can sell. Well, a wholesaler does the same thing. You think about the wholesaler difference is not really making anything. The wholesaler, the inputs are the large volume orders. So let's say, for example, the wholesaler would buy all of those shirts. There's thousands of shirts made. The wholesaler would buy all of them. That's a large volume per order of each product. So lots and lots of shirts. White, size large shirts. Or pink, size medium dresses. That wholesaler's job then is more or less to break the bulk, I'll call it. They have to store it. They have to sort it. So there's a certain number of large, certain number of mediums, certain number of small. They need to package that together. So let's say, for example, a store had an order. Some store, let's say Mercer's Marine here in Clarenville, has an order for different items from the wholesaler. So the wholesaler's job then is to pull from the various store what's stored and put it into a package shipment. So it could be 500 pink shirts, 24 blue shirts, 24 red shirts, 300 shirts are large, 300 shirts are medium, 300 shirts are small, these sorts of things. And then the wholesaler's job is to ship them. Now, they then would ship it out to stores such as Mercer's, and that would get hung up on a store. So let's look at it from the retailer's point of view in terms of operations. So the retailer goes and gets those shirts delivered from the wholesaler, and then their job is to store it, to provide information to the customer or face-to-face with the customer, provide an opportunity for the customer to see the product. So, for example, putting the shirts on display or putting them on a mannequin, putting them on a shelf, putting them on a rack. And their job then would be to sell it to individual customers. So the customer would have lots of variety and choice. And we could also think about a laundry, which is a service firm. Now, service firms don't make anything, but they would take the shirts, dirty shirts, for example, sort them, wash them, press them, store them, and their output is clean clothes. So no matter what type of business it is, whether it's the raw manufacturer, the wholesaler, the retailer, or the service firm, you can use this input, process, output rationale. And what we need to be able to do is to break the system down in terms of operations. Our job is to logically break the system down into what are the inputs, what are the processes, and what order would those processes fall in. We're also going to have to worry about how long it's going to take to do each of those processes in order to produce an output. Now, one of the ways this is done, and this brings me back, this still gives me the heebie-jeebies, because I do this, and I think back to my days in quant in university when I had to do quant, and we did this program evaluation review technique. And we went into it in intricate detail, more intricate than I like. But the basic concept of Pert is really, really simple. It takes what we just saw and it rationalizes the process in terms of the basic steps and how long it takes to do each basic step. So let's take, for example, we have a couple of items in inventory. We got raw material inventory X and raw material inventory Y. So we're a manufacturer, let's say. And that raw material could theoretically be, we look back at what the apparel manufacturer, cloth, thread, and buttons, okay? So raw material X could be cloth, raw material Y could be buttons. The first process that we want to do, if we go back here and we look at the process store, well, let's take cutting, okay? Let's take cutting just as an example. These don't necessarily match up. I'm just making them match up. So let's assume that we're going to cut it. So there's a process for cutting sleeves, fronts, backs. You can imagine that each of these are individual processes. And each of those individual processes take an amount of time. In this case, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Okay. Same would hold true for buttons. Now, in order to make that shirt, you need the material, the cloth, and you need the buttons. So there's two of these processes can go on simultaneously. In other words, cutting the material and sorting out the buttons. Once those processes happen, and you can imagine this physically as being a mat on a shop floor, okay? The product comes in here, works its way down through these tables here. There's the outer product that comes in here, works its way down there. So at the end of this, at the inspection, someone's inspecting, we have all of the parts of the shirt and the buttons. And these buttons, you know, someone had to drill holes in the buttons, let's say, for example. So you got the buttons, sort the buttons, and drill holes in the buttons. So here's our buttons, here's our pieces of shirts. So all those parts need to come together into what we call the assembling, which is putting the sleeve on, sewing that onto the body, sewing the other sleeve onto the body, and then sewing on the buttons. So that's what we would consider the assembly. Quality control, someone inspects it to make sure all the buttons are on right, there's no buttons falling off or stuff like that. And then we need to be able to pack it into a cellophane type of bag, box, whatever you want to call it. And this then goes off to finished goods inventory. Now, the critical thing of what Pert does is it not only lays out the process for individual components, so they can be done what's called in parallel. So we can do the buttons. If we say this is button manufacturing or button work, can be done in parallel with the cutting work for the shirts. These are brought together here where they're assembled. Now, each of these processes have their own time. So let's say, for example, this particular cutting, 15 minutes for process 1, 10 more minutes, that's 25 minutes in total, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. So it's going to take us 50 minutes to get through this section. And this is only going to take 25 minutes in total. But this one is going to be on the dead for 25 minutes while this one finishes up. Okay, so really, the total amount of time it takes to get to down here is not additive. It's 25 and 50. So this one here takes 50. So that's going to be basically the shortest time that you can get two of these sets of things done, because this one here takes longer, and you got to finish that one in order to be able to move it, to allow this one to be assembled. So there's 50 minutes is the total time that's used here. Seeing time goes by and it doesn't come back. Another 30 minutes to assemble it. That's 80 minutes. Quality control is another 10 minutes. That's 90 minutes. 5 minutes to pack it. So that's 95 minutes. So what we got is the total amount of time, if we add all the times together, is 120 minutes. But the critical path time, we call this critical path, is the total time in order to do the assembly from the time it comes in as raw material to the time that it's a finished good. So 95. So this is this is really dependent on the longest time it takes to get the individual process done, plus the other items. That's 95. So this program and evaluation technique, we thank the military for this. This really came in the 1950s. This was invented for the Polaris nuclear missile submarine system. The U.S. Navy came up with this simple concept of Pert back in the 50s in order to be able to build submarines. Okay, so this is where this came from. But at the same time, manufacturers looked at it and said, well, this is pretty good because we could figure out how long it's going to take to produce something from the time it walks through the factory door to the time it leaves the factory door as a complete product. We can figure out how long, and we could effectively look to improve the time if we do the process in such a way that maximizes the efficiency. So the program evaluation review technique allows the production process to be broken into its components so that we can find minimum downtime, minimum time, maximum efficiency. So that's what Pert really is designed to do. Let's take a look at this little, further explain this.
In this video, I want to answer the question, what is a Pert chart? Pert stands for Program, Evaluation and Review Technique. And as a methodology, it dates to the late 1950s and was invented by the US Navy and consultants Booz Allen Hamilton. And it's based in a form of network chart. A Pert chart is just a proprietary brand of network chart. Pert charts are less frequently used than their more commonly seen sibling, the critical path method. The critical path method uses activities on nodes, and those activities are connected up by lines. The Pert technique flips it over, and it shows the activities on the connecting lines, and then the nodes represent the branching structure of the network chart. In many ways, the two are pretty much the same. It's just a stylistic approach to how they're represented. So if Pert charts have activities on arrows, is there a substantive difference between the Pert method and the critical path method? And the answer is yes, because the second difference is of much more substance. The critical path method uses a much simpler single point estimate for the duration of an activity. You estimate how long the activity is going to take, and that's the number that goes into the model. In Pert, we actually use a 3-point estimate for every duration. So we estimate what we consider to be the most likely duration, which is the estimate that would have gone into the critical path method. But we also make a pessimistic estimate and an optimistic estimate. The pessimistic estimate is the longest we think plausibly this task is likely to take, and the optimistic, the fastest we think we are likely to be able to do the task. And typically these estimates are not symmetric in the sense that the optimistic estimate is not the same distance from the most likely estimate as the pessimistic estimate. So this gives us a kind of triangular distribution. As a result of some simple mathematics, we can therefore estimate an average duration for the task based on our 3-point estimate. And the way that we do that is we average the three estimates, the optimistic, the pessimistic, and the most likely. But we don't give these equal weighting because there's a reason why the most likely is the most likely, and so we give it a higher weighting. Typically, the Pert method suggests that we multiply both the optimistic and the pessimistic by 1, and we multiply the most likely by 4. We add them all together and divide by 6. That's not the only way we could do it. We could take a highly pessimistic view and multiply the optimistic by 1, the most likely by 4, and the pessimistic by 2, and divide by 7. Or we can
just
increase the weighting on the most likely. We can also calculate the standard deviation get some sort of idea of the spread of likelihoods around our average. And the way that we calculate that is we subtract the optimistic estimate from the pessimistic estimate, and then we divide the answer by 6. And that gives us a plus or minus on our average. So the Pert methodology is a way of estimating the duration of projects, firstly by building a network where the convention is that we use the arrows to define the tasks, and then the nodes show how the arrows relate to one another. And secondly, the lengths of those arrows, the durations that are recorded on those arrows, are based on 3-point estimates from which we can calculate average durations and standard deviations. And of course, with today's modern software, it's very straightforward to put in all of your estimates for all the tasks and for the software to calculate not only an average duration of the whole project, but to composite all of the standard deviations up and figure out the likely spread from the most optimistic to the most pessimistic estimate for the whole project.
Now, that little video gets a little bit more complicated than we need to, but it does show how statistics, I wanted to show you how statistics can make a practical application, because I know how much you all love stats. But effectively, this sort of Pert system, if we can take times and we can take processes, we can figure out how long it's going to take to do the entire process. So that's what Pert is really all about. How can we do that? So I just wanted to kind of think about, for example, get you to think about some of this. Let's assume we're building a house, for example. And if we think about a house, let me make that white. If we think about a house, we got to ask ourselves, what are the individual tasks in building a house? What are the order of the tasks? And how long do you think it will take each task? Okay? I want to do this very simply. I don't want to overwhelm you with detail here. So let's think about the individual tasks for a house. First of all, we have to put in the foundation. Okay? Once we have the foundation, then we have to put the floor on. Once we have the floor done, then we can put up the walls. Once we have the walls done, then we can put on I'm going to call it the roof rafters. And then we can put on the roof. Okay. So this is not a complete house. I agree. There are other things we can do, but for the purposes of this illustration, let's assume that those are the things that fundamentally build the house. So we have to think about what the order of the task is. And the order of the task, I did put them down in order. We have to build the foundation first before we put up the floor. The floor has to go on before the walls before the roof, rafters, and then the roof itself. So that's the sequence. So we could be given a bunch of tasks and we'll have to order them. But effectively, I've ordered them as we've done. Now, so we have to ask ourselves, how long will it take to do each task? So this is what we call a build-up method. So effectively, if we know that tasks are sequential or parallel, can we do any of those tasks at the same time that we do another? And the answer, well, in the foundation, we have to do the foundation before anything. There's no point in doing a house unless you have a foundation. So it's what we consider a sequential task. Let's assume that a foundation will take 1 week to do. The floor. We can't put the walls, roof, rafters, or roof up without the floor. So the roof, like the foundation, is a sequential task. And let's assume that the floor will take 2 weeks. The walls. The walls can't go up without the floor being done. And the roof rafters and the roof can't be put on without the floor being done, or without the walls being done. So let's assume that's going to take 1 week. So sequential task, 1 week. Roof rafters, again, sequential task, can't do it for everything else. And let's say 1 week. And the roof itself, let's say it's going to be a sequential task, 1 week. Now, if the question then, having done all this, if you break it down into its components and you find that all the tasks, some tasks are parallel, for example. So first of all, we're just going to assume that all of these tasks are sequential. We ask, how long will it take to do this project? Well, how long is it going to take? 1 week plus 2 weeks is 3 weeks, plus another week is 4 weeks, plus another week is 5 weeks, plus another week is 6 weeks. So under this scenario, 6 weeks. Okay? So this is assuming that all the tasks are sequential. We could run into an example where some of the tasks can be done at the same time. So let's think about this again, building a house, but let's look, I just want to introduce this concept of it being done at the same time. Okay, I'm going to add one more task to this, and that is install plumbing. Okay. Now we have to ask ourselves, is the plumbing dependent on anything else? Well, we certainly need a foundation. We certainly need a floor. We certainly need walls. And we certainly need, well, the roof rafters. But really, do we need the roof? So probably not, if it's not raining, let's say. But, we certainly need, let's say we certainly need the foundation, the floor, and the walls. Okay? And let's say it's going to take 1 week to do the install plumbing. Now, we have to assume that different people are doing the different tasks. So the question I would ask you is then, is the house going to take 7 weeks to complete because it's 1 more week? Or can this be done at the same time? Well, I think I would argue here that the install plumbing can be done the same time that in the same week, sorry, I want to go here, in the same week that the roof rafters, because there's no plumbing in the roof. So once we got the foundation, floors, and walls done, the installed plumbing can be done at the same time that the roof rafters are being done. So effectively, even though it will take a week to install the plumbing, it can be done at the same time. We'll make that a parallel. It can be done at the same time that the roof rafters. So in other words, even though this is extra week's work, it's done at the same time roof rafters. So the total time to build a house will still only be 6 weeks. So that won't increase because there are parallel tasks. If we think, for example, if you go back to your experience with the Hibernia platform, when the Hibernia or the Hebron platform was built, okay? You may remember that the top and the bottom, the top sides and the bottom were built separately. Bear with me while I get that picture. So what had happened in the case of Hibernia, we had this happen. There was a very extensive project plan for building Hibernia. And the first thing that was involved was building this top part. That top part was built on land, okay? And it took about 3 to 4 years to complete. Then we saw that, okay, the bottom part, oops, I'm on the wrong piece. The bottom part was produced at the same time. So we had the top sides, which were built on land, This part here was built largely in the water. A certain part of it was built in the land, but largely it was built in the water. And when it came time, they were built in parallel to one another. This one was done at the same time as this. And when it was all said and done, one was floated on top of the other, and this is the finished product. Okay, so this was a job, this was a project, this was a project. Those projects ran in parallel. They were made together out in Trinity Bay, and voila, the oil rig was complete, towed out to the Grand Banks, and started pumping oil. So this is what program evaluation and review technique is all about. How long will it take to do this? How long will it take to do this part? We need two of them to finish up basically at the same time. We'll adjust our schedules so that both will finish up at the same time so that we can actually make the two together and be able to ship the product offshore to produce oil. And that's exactly what happened. Any questions on that? The second item that we look at within this project or within project operations is the whole concept of total quality management. And that's something that's come up over the last number of years. Largely, these program evaluation review techniques and these types of strategies were designed to ensure that the product was produced, but produced at a higher quality because the various components were individually assessed. And we saw, for example, in that graphic, we saw that you could do quality control with each component as it went along. So when the final component, which contained all the subcomponents, were put together, it worked. So total quality management is basically a simple philosophy more than anything else, and it focuses on problem solving and the control of quality. So an organization that focuses on total quality management uses factors such as consumer-driven product quality, efficient distribution, quick response, continuous improvement, elimination of waste, and top management leadership and commitment as measurement tools. These systems are often developed in conjunction with other business and engineering disciplines to use cross-functional approach. So we have the operations, the physical production and operations combined with this, I'll call it a philosophy and process type operation in order to ensure we got high quality. So to achieve the type of standard, we need to realize the business is going to exist in the long run. So we're more concerned about long-term performance. We involve the employees in decision-making. We invest time and effort and training. And we develop standards by which quality can be measured. And then we continually measure for high internal quality. So that's really what we're at whenever we're in the process of total quality management. And organizations, you will see, organizations will attempt to improve their quality as a way of saving money or making more money, because if it meets that standard, there's less waste and a higher opportunity for making revenue.